Hello. I'm just checking things are working as they should. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Gareth Bell-Jones, and I'm the curator and director of Flat Time House. This event is being recorded, so that you're aware, but the only cameras that are on will be those of the speakers. This is the second event that Flat Time House has hosted to coincide with the launch of the Archive of Destruction website, which has been put together by Jes Fernie after over a decade of work and research in this area. And we feel very privileged at Flat Time House to be able to partner with Jes in launching the archive and hosting these events. There will be a book launch that we'll host later in the year, and the website is really a project which is ongoing and constantly developing. Jes will tell you more about this. So really what's present on the website is just the starting point for what's going to develop into an even bigger project, and for many more years to come, I expect. So this event is the second of the two launch events, and it's called Everything Will Be Interrupted. And for this event, we have the speakers Eloise Hawser, Marysia Lewandowska, and Vanessa Onwumezi, and it will be hosted by Jes Fernie. I will put, for those I don't know if everyone's been on the chat yet, but I'm just going to put the link to the website in the chat so that everyone can see it. I'm not going to take too long because we've got three speakers today, but I'd just like to introduce Jes Fernie. So I first came to know about this project from a talk called Destroyed Public Art, a Critical Reflection, which was at the University of Essex in 2011, so 10 years ago now. And just been working on this whole period, collecting examples and anecdotes and stories of these amazing, wonderful accounts that's happened to these artworks. And it was, we were approached by Jes about the possibility of working with Flat Time House and the John Latham Archive, where we've got so much, so many examples of John's relationship to destruction in his work. And this turned into a residency with the archive in 2019. So for those of you that don't know Flat Time House, Flat Time House opened in 2008 as a gallery with a program of exhibitions and events exploring the continued legacy of John Latham's practice and his theoretical ideas. It also provides a centre for alternative learning, which includes the John Latham Archive, art publishing, and an artist residency space. So again, I'm just going to pop that website in the chat. So if you're interested in having a look at that, you can see that there. And now I'm going to hand over to Jes Fernie. So Jes is an independent curator and writer based in Essex in the UK. She works with galleries, architectural practices, and public realm organisations on public programmes, commissioning schemes, exhibitions, and residency projects across the UK and abroad. She writes and lectures extensively, and has worked with a broad range of organisations, including Manchester International Festival, Tate, Pier Gallery, Serpentine Gallery, Turf Projects, Icon Gallery, Flat Time House, Milton Keynes Gallery, Reba, Arts Council England, Lund Cathedral, St Paul's Cathedral, and the RCA. She's an associate lecturer at Central St Martin's and a board member of Matt's Gallery. The Archive of Destruction launched this year in 2021. So there's Jes's formal bio. And just a reminder, there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the event today. So you can pop those into the chat, or if you think of examples of artworks that you think are really good examples, then you can pop those in there too. All right, thank you very much. I'll hand over to Jes.
Thanks so much, Gareth. That was really lovely. It's genuinely really great to be working with you and Flat Time House on this series of talks in this programme. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Eloise Hawser, Marysia Lewandowska, and Vanessa Onwuemezi. They're three of the artists and writers who I have invited to contribute texts and essays to the Archive of Destruction. But before we dive in, I thought I'd give you a very brief introduction to the archive, which, as Gareth says, was launched a month ago in early June. The research itself started 10 years ago, also, as Gareth said, when I was working on a programme for a public sculpture called Luna Park that Heather and Ivan Morrison made for Portsmouth. It was a massive dinosaur. You can see pictures of it on the website under Claire Doherty's text. So it was destroyed and it was reduced to a sort of blackened, gnarled corpse. And after a few days of real kind of upset and worry about this destruction and the fallout of the programme that I developed in Colchester for its next iteration, I began to think about the Morrisons' interest in potential dystopic futures and thought that this may be an opportunity to consider the idea of destruction of public artworks as a sort of potentially fruitful subject for discussion and research. So I organised a conference with the University of Essex and the curating students at the Royal College, which was, you know, I remember it really well. It was sort of booked out within the day and we had to keep moving rooms, and Gareth was there. It was really lovely. And it just seemed that there was a huge amount of interest in the subject. And since then, I've been gathering all these stories about public artworks that have been destroyed or which have the concepts of destruction embedded within their making or concept. And I should say that I've been specifically looking at modern and contemporary works made over the last 100 years from across the world. So I'm not looking at sort of monuments and statues beyond that period. So fast forward 10 years and I've launched the archive, which is made up of 50 artworks with texts that I've written telling the stories of their destruction, as well as a series of essays and conversations that I've commissioned. And as maybe you will have seen on the website, these essays are really wide-ranging, kind of exploratory responses to both the archive and a kind of investigation into the nature of destruction. The process, collection and categorization system in the archive is entirely unscientific, I should say, as I'm sure you will be aware if you've explored it. The whole project is built on a kind of personal narrative, my network with artists and curators and members of the public, conversations and travel, and in categorizing the artworks into modes of destruction, such as fear and greed and love, entropy. I'm obviously kind of having fun, but playing with the kind of limited and often absurd categorization system that museums and archives and collections employ. And I have taken liberties with that widely held view of destruction as obliteration. So I am using the term loosely to include burning, decomposing, selling, ignoring, smashing, shooting, removing, ripping, burying, and kissing, amongst other forms. So essentially, what I'm interested in is the way that a public artwork can become a catalyst for a conversation around social, political, and environmental issues. And many of the stories in the archive reveal the ways that artworks can take on this kind of palimpsestuous, I keep using that word and I'm not quite sure it's a real word, but anyway, the kind of the layered character of story making, kind of all these artworks accrue meaning and stories and actions through and responses from a broad range of publics. That's essentially what I'm interested in. And as Gareth says, the project's ongoing. I'll be adding artworks to the archive, commissioning new essays and publishing books and newspapers. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. I have to say that the response has been incredibly heartening, particularly the international response. I've got all these emails and messages from people in Lisbon and Berlin and Cape Town and Moscow and Beirut. It's been pretty amazing. Anyway, so let's move on to today's event. We have three incredible speakers, so a lot to get through. I'm not going to go through lengthy biographical introductions. They are available on the archive website. I have been having an amazing kind of time talking to these three speakers over lockdown, and I thought it would be great to kind of bring them together to talk about their texts, but also to respond to the archive and maybe respond to other artworks in the archive or each other's texts. And I do understand that time is limited. We just have basically now 45 minutes, so we won't be going to huge depth. It's rather an opportunity for you to kind of see a sense of their responses. So we are going to start with Eloise. Eloise Hawser is an artist based in London who is interested in the infrastructure that supports contemporary life, from waste management to water treatment systems. But more than that, from my point of view, she's interested in the kind of bigger picture, the sort of social, political, economic and environmental contexts in which things are made and presented and thought through. Hence her interest in the archive, I think. There's a fair amount of walking and storytelling involved in her practice that reveals strange and magical histories, architectural details and contexts. And if you haven't been on one of her guided walks, I really, really recommend it. They are brilliant. So I've known Eloise for a few years, and this idea for an essay came out of our conversations about the archive in general. And also I should say that Eloise pointed me towards Alison Wilding's Ambit, which is also in the archive, and maybe we can pick up on later, but that's an aside. So Eloise, for your Archive of Destruction talk, you chose to look at the really weird and strange, intriguing story of the pro-fascist Futurist suit and its one and only outing on the 11th of December in 1914. And when you first told me about it, I just knew it had to play some kind of role in the archive. It really does expand the parameters of what we consider to be public artwork and moves it into a kind of performative political sphere, which I thought was just really interesting. So could you give us a brief overview of that story? And I can show images while you do so, Eloise.
Yes, great. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to talk here. I'm a huge fan of the Archive of Destruction. It's hard to contribute one story because they're all so fascinating. But yeah, but I have written a text on the Futurist suit, which, as you mentioned, only had a single public outing. So I guess first off, as a public artwork, it was a sort of a one-time public artwork. I think, well, I guess probably we know about the Futurists, but for those who might, well, just to start, the Futurists, obviously what it was very distinctive about them was they published an enormous range of manifestos on everything from cooking to clothes to architecture, and the Futurist suit was it comes from a manifesto that Balla wrote in 1914, and the idea, it was called the anti-neutral suit, and his idea was really, I suppose, I mean, the thing that stuck out for me initially was the way that it sort of extended the formal kind of innovations onto a piece of clothing, and I was quite interested in this idea of, I suppose, the depth of their proletizing on industry and craft, and and then so this suit, the idea of this suit was that that it would have this this incredibly sort of that it would sort of incite anyone who came across it, anyone who encountered it, to sort of immediate violence and sort of rancor, and they felt that the garment would be, explosive, like wearing a human flag, and they put together the suit. The original plan, I mean, it came out of a much longer set of manifestos about futurist clothing, but the basic plan was to design something that could be put on extremely easily without kind of buttons and without seams and without things that they considered to be traditional, and that would have this very bright sort of bellicose look about it. Anyway, so they set about putting this suit together, and it was to have its debut at a lecture. So there was a student lecture given by Giuseppe Chiavenda. Just I pronounced it wrong, but it was a student lecture at the Roan's Institute for Civil Law, and effectively what they did is they concealed the suit under a cape, and then they attended the lecture and unveiled it. The intention was the Futurists were furious about the Italian and in this particular professor's stance on the war, and they felt that it was called the anti-neutral suit. So the plan was to incite people to join the war effort on the side of the Nazis. So they unveiled the suit, and it did have the desired effect. There's a passage that Balla wrote, so I'll just read a little bit from that. We force our way through, slamming into the lecture halls. The students rear up. The professors try to escape like the inhabitants of Troy. The bells are ringing. The janitors come running like firemen. Alarm, throw them out. Bottles are smashed between the rage of our opponents and the exaltation of our sympathizers. The most impetuous moment is here, the most lyrical, the most philosophical. Bristling with clenched fists and torn open mouths, I unbutton my cape and in one rip pull out the beret from under the skin of my Loden cape escapes a human flag. And actually, in the course of this event, in the course of unveiling the suit, it was completely destroyed. And there's a great piece of writing about it by Rose Sidney Parfitt, who describes it, the suit as destroyed by the force of its own impact. And this is Canguillo again. He says, before my certain combustion, I had a chilly surprise right there in the street. I feel and find myself to be all but naked. The tricolour jacket vanished along with the beret, trousers in tatters, the buttons missing, the braces hanging. I believe myself to be the lover of Italy caught in the act. So he's describing how the suit was torn off him during this lecture. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of paradox, that he's kind of naked and he's sort of seeing this, the destruction of the suit as part in a way of this success, or this idea of being caught in the act. The suit itself, the actual fabrication or sort of the tailoring of the suit was really interesting, because Balla had originally planned to make 3 of the suits, but he found it very hard, obviously, to figure out how to make the suit, and it ended up being made by his daughters, Alicia and Lucy, and they used actually very traditional handicraft. So it was quite a far cry from this very androgynous, industrialized and automatic processes that were celebrated by the Futurists and were part of their sort of designs for future clothing.
I think that was one of the things I was so interested in, the idea of that something that was generally used, was used to incite violence, was ultimately this incredible sort of poignant failure. And that's something that I thought was really interesting in terms of the archive of destruction, this idea that if you place an artwork in the public realm and it's destroyed in some way, it's deemed to be a failure. This idea that something, we decide what is or isn't a failure. And the failure of this suit in terms of its construction, its ideology is, it's just a really interesting kind of sort of poignant way of thinking about, destruction and sort of political allegiances, and in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, I think on your point of failure, there's so many things here that are of interest. And the first was this kind of reframing of the fact that the suit did not withstand the force of its own impact or the force of its unveiling. And there was this kind of confusion, I think, between a piece of a garment as a sort of, as something designed to incite a sort of violence or some sort of effect, and something that was actually supposed to sort of be innovative and kind of protect its wearer. And in terms of kind of having any longevity as a garment for sort of conflict, of course it failed disastrously, and the event failed, and he ended up naked in tatters on the road. But he reframes that in this where he sort of talks about himself as the tricolour jacket vanished along with the beret, trousers in tatters, the buttons missing, the braces hanging. I believe myself to be the lover of Italy caught in the act. This sort of unbelievable kind of chauvinism that he's kind of been caught out as a sort of adulterous.
And the fact that he had to ultimately employ his daughters to make this thing, the crafted nature of it by hand and the gendered nature was absolutely not what he was sort of angling for.
Yeah, and and the pictures that you showed of the suit, obviously, well, they are sort of, there's only a very few images available of the suit, and I think, of course, he found, or they found themselves sort of caught up in the actual how to actually realize the tailoring of the suit, and then I think it, as you can see in the photos, it also looks very impractical, and it was clearly very impractical. I think I think, you know, that's so it can sort of roundly be seen as a failure, but I there is this idea in a way. I mean, I discovered it in the reading up for this piece of, so it's not mine, of Sydney Rose Parfitt, who talks about how, in a way, we could understand this moment of sort of this very, of kind of this, I guess, well, firstly, what's interesting too with the Futurist suit is there was a sort of mistaking of kind of the material of the suit as in itself the politics of the wearer, or you know, because of course the drive to destroy the suit was not that it in itself was imbued with something. It was more about the gesture and the way that it was. But the article talks about this moment of the Futurist suit as being the kind of precedent to a moment that we're in at the moment, where sort of, or at least making this link between the clothes that we wear and a sort of branding of self. So obviously you have with like Nike, and you know, this with the Futurists said it actually in one of their manifestos. They said, one thinks and acts as one dresses, you know, which in 1914 was clearly somewhat unusual idea.
So and then finally, you don't have to comment on this, but if the viewers read the text, you'll see the way that it's finished, that Eloise's text it concludes, which is just great. This idea that, you know, the Futurists and Giacomo Balla would absolutely hate the idea of being in my archive. It would be deeply problematic. So the idea of, you know, this act of preservation, establishing this continuity with the past. So I'm rather enjoying that anyway. Thank you so much, Eloise. It went far too quickly, but we must move on to Marysia Lewandowska now. Marysia is an artist who is based in London, but she's currently joining us from Poland, where she grew up. She has a long-standing interest in archives and the sharing of knowledge and collective memory and public discourse. And she employs her extensive international network of artists and curators and writers and thinkers and academics to create kind of collaborations and conversations and projects and links between strangers. And it's been such a pleasure to include her kind of generous and generative practice within the archive. And I'm so pleased you're able to join us from Poland, Marysia. Your contribution to the archive you make in your contribution, you make the case for destruction to be embedded within public discourse and archives and collective memories, rather than erased. For a city's cultural DNA to be constructed through publicly accessible documents, conversations, and ideas, as you say in your text, that allow for the social imaginary to expand. And you discuss the problem of commodification of images and ideas through copyright practices, which we'll no doubt go on to discuss. Could you tell us a bit about this practice and your interest in archives and the importance of open access to ideas, documents, and conversations? And obviously, maybe also mention your amazing women's audio archive, which I think is where we first met. That was, you gave a talk at the Whitechapel, and I was very excited to meet you then.
Hi, Jess. Thanks so much to reach out initially to contribute to your amazing project, and also to say something more about it today. And yeah, I hope my internet is stable enough to.
Could you talk a bit more towards the laptop? Then we'll be able to hear you a bit better, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Right, so yeah, we met at the event at the Whitechapel Art Gallery, well, a few years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, where I was presenting and in conversation with Rosalie Schweiker about the Women's Audio Archive, which was an archive which really didn't mean to be an archive. It was initially just a name that I've given to an activity as I arrived from Poland in the mid-80s in London, and tried to understand what that shift meant. So meeting with women in conversation, very much as I continue to do that, and Jes, you're part of that, of course. Somehow it felt to me that a conversation is also the site which rarely features as a legitimate place for a kind of wider cultural interest. So I began, well, carrying a tape recorder. Of course, all these recordings were analog everywhere, and started recording those conversations, which were I always stress that they were not interviews. They were truly quite random, often very emotional notations of an encounter with someone who I really didn't know. So a conversation and the process of recording was a way of getting to know someone and keeping a record of it. So yeah, I think but at that time, this was just an orientation tool for me. I had not, and I called it the Women's Audio Archive in order to, well, pretend that there was an organization, that there was an infrastructure.
But this is where there's so many parallels with the archive of destruction. The fact is, it's just us as individuals in the world trying to create these strange narratives. There's no institution, there's no kind of museum or historical. It's just a thing that we've made, and we're kind of presenting it as a authoritative structure that then becomes really playful and strange.
Sure, the fact that you need to invent yourself, or rather to self-institute. This is a very good example of kind of self-instituting and deciding what kind of values you want to reproduce through this activity. So that beginning, and I think that way of understanding practice, for me, coming from Poland at a time where, well, in Poland, this was under martial law, So a very different kind of political moment, and also a moment which I carried a lot of fear inside me. And the recordings, if you ever listen to any of them, they're not all of them conversations. Some of them are just recordings of public lectures or events, but the ones which are, and even the ones which are actually made in public, you can hear my fear of recording, because that would have been something that would be problematic under the regime that I was leaving. And that stayed with me for a very, very long time, that recording itself is a form of dissent.
Yeah.
So I think that this, and documenting dissent, which is what I think you been doing, and trying to create an understanding for the circumstances when dissent was occurring, and the politics of what led to these events, I think is an incredible value of what you've done in your archive. So just to sort of quickly say, the archiving is a way of practicing, and it's also a way of understanding what one can do within, you know, any given moment. But that's, you know, there are many things inside archiving.
Yeah.
And the moment of recording is one, but the moment of sharing and dissemination is a whole different story.
Yeah. Marysia, I'm really aware of the time, so I'm going to screen share now, and really, really briefly, I think we should leave people to read your amazing text, but if you could just tell us very briefly the kind of process that you went through. I think the example of trying to get an image, you know, copyrighted image from the Getty was really useful in this discussion. So let me just go ahead. If you just start the story and I'll do some.
Right. So I think the story maybe is embedded in a conversation with you, Jes, where you sent me some of the examples that you are going to include in the archive of distraction. And one of those was Jacob Epstein's tomb in Paris for Oscar Wilde. And I think in a quite casual conversation, when you described that you were trying to get hold of this particular image, which kind of beautifully links to Eloise's story of veiling and unveiling. This is happening in Paris. Somehow I think I said that I knew someone at the Getty Archive, and that maybe I could try and facilitate a contact where the permission could be granted. And as I went on this journey to try and find out, you know, who truly owns this image, a story began to unveil to me, which was that, you know, the whole of the Getty archive is actually being, the image archive and the sound is bought by Microsoft. So it's, or rather it's administered by Microsoft. And I think, you know, it is really what, this was the moment where I thought that is a form of distraction. This really qualifies to start thinking about copyright and expropriation of, well, heritage, which very often is owned by all of us, especially things which are in the archive, which are mainly donations, to stop it from, well, it's not so much to stop it from distribution, but it is really about controlling not just the image, but also the reputations of people associated with images, texts, sounds, and so on. So if Jes wanted to, well, use the image itself,
which I did. I went through the process of trying to get this image and then realizing, as you said, that it cost nearly £400 to use.
Right. So I thought, well, maybe I should try and write about this, but also, as I did many times in the past, find another way of representing something that has been withdrawn or that is, well, inaccessible for financial reasons. So I contacted, well, via a number of kind of other people, an artist in Paris, Camille Benab Lopez, and who is a photographer mainly, and asked her if she would be willing to go to Père Lachaise, where the tomb is placed, to kind of perform a way, or perform another veiling, or perform the photograph. And, you know, she was intrigued. So we had few meetings. And as you saw in the previous slide, she is trying to throw the black cloth over the tomb unsuccessfully, because it's just too big, too high. So it's her and a friend performing this action of veiling. The one thing to say is, why was it veiled in the first place? Which is also something it's not quite available to us in these photographs. It's because in Epstein's sculpture, the genitals are huge. So the male genitals of this figure, of this angel, are very, very pronounced. And the French authorities in 1912, when this was ready to be unveiled, objected to it. So they placed this black cloth on top of the monument, and it stayed there for 2 years. So it's another, I think it kind of adds to this story of transgression. And if you like, this action by Camille was another form of transgression, instituted by me, to say, yes, I know it's withdrawn, but maybe we could bring it back to public consciousness through this action.
And you did it, yeah, you did it so brilliantly. And I was so excited when you decided that this was, you know, sort of performance part of your text, which I think is great. And it links to quite a few artworks on the in the archive that have this kind of palincestuous, I keep saying, it's sort of layered natured conversation with an original artwork. And I'm quite interested in the fact that a lot of those original artworks are by men, and then the kind of overlaying of new histories and stories are by women. But that's all for another another conversation. Thank you so much, Marysia. We can go on to talk more, hopefully, in the discussion. But let me now introduce Vanessa Onwuemezi. Vanessa, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay.
I'm really glad you could join us today from your holiday, which I apologise for interrupting. Vanessa is a writer and poet, also based in London. She's written for the White Review, Freeze, Prototype and Five Dials, and her much anticipated debut short story collection, Dark Neighbourhood, is due to be published this October by Fitzcarraldo Editions. Her beautifully evocative texts take readers on a visceral, haunting journey to places that are loaded with history, atmosphere and memory. And when I read Vanessa's incredible text on Lynette Yiadom-Boakye's painting, Prospect West of a Necromancer, that was published in Freeze last year, I just felt compelled to write to her, to ask her to write a text for the archive. And we embarked on a really lovely conversation that went sort of all over the place. I remember it very vividly in lockdown, which made it even more kind of magical, about decreation, as discussed by one of our heroes, Simone Weil, and the relationship of destruction to the nature of time, which I know you talk a lot about in your writing. And out of that conversation came Destroyed in Love, the text that Vanessa's written for the archive. It's a short text which moves between the 1700s and the present day, touching on Hugh Locke's restoration work, which is in the archive, and the tearing down of Colston's statue in Bristol, the trauma and violence of slavery, and the sea crossings of present day refugees. And I've asked Vanessa to do a reading of her text today. It's very short, and then maybe we can have a discussion afterwards if we have some time. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Yes, thanks, Jess. I'll just say very quickly, it's been fantastic to be involved in the Archive of Disruption. Thanks to Gareth at Flat Time House too. And I will, without further ado, I'll get into the reading. So this is Destroyed in Love. What is it to become nothing? If only we could love ourselves. An aside. A monument. Some of the frozen past says to us, I exist, but we tell it, you will no longer exist. Point a finger at its head, off, and point the arrow of time. Colston is draped in gold. Good. But his shoulders are weighted enough already. By his own flesh is bronze. Fine and so long, Colston, farewell. He's fled and is hiding, pressed against the riverbed, eyes oxidized to an acid green. Left to vacillate in the currents of a blood tide unrested by revolutions of power and anguish of generations. The unsatisfied us. He is gone from the plinth, but the I remains. Now as a vacant space in our houses, an absence between our lungs and the heart. My mistake. To put myself into Finn's imaginary, to combine the metal with the cells of my skin, bind my energy with gold and wear it around my neck, the gold of a once idol. Have I tied myself to this wreck on the riverbed? That ship of history down by fierce winds that have long passed, but will return having traveled the curve of the earth from lung to lung, airway through airway and out of this upright body that convulses to say, I, yes, I am here. And this wreck holds such fascination to imagine the last moments of the inhabitants, of cabins held together with bolts and wood, the shape of which has been penetrated, preserved under coral, and we wonder what food was in their bellies, in their bottles, what drink, how many dark people they held below. They died floating above their beds. And the Coast Guard, they had turned them back, and then, in their fatal panic, 301 plus a man, 3 women, a child presumed drowned. The rubber carcass of their boat, found by the good citizens who comb the beaches at low tide, wearing helmets of bronze, their heavy skin drags and marks the sand as they pick over the rocks in search of their gold and sovereignty. All they ever find are dead bodies. What is imaginary? Thoughts of what is to come and what has been, the forward movement of waves onto the beach, the relentless forward of progress. But matter does move time. Do we consent to the churn of history? Stone over stone, hand to air, matter and matter, we, the force of time and change, come to know how much pressure to apply to a body, to make love to it, to kill it. Poor things, thick in the dream. Before Colston, somewhere between midnight and 4 a.m., in a late summer fury, more monuments are strangled. Now they lean forward in terror to show us the wounds that betray their eternal vulnerability, necks marked by cords abrasion. They speak of how much they suffered and struggled in losing their heads. We can't unsee. Etched as the abrasions are, as their fingernails are etched into the material. What's left? To dislodge the idol from my spine and for once hold up my own head. To realize that it has no weight at all. These dead idols would will it, that in turn they may destroy me, that I die before my death.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. It was really wonderful to hear you read that after having read it so many times myself.
Yes.
There are so many strands of thought in that text that relate to the subject of destruction, sort of becoming nothing, but the I remains. Irreversibility, chaos, historical narratives, and the nature of time and change, the churn of history, as you call it. Could you just talk a little bit about your process of developing those thoughts after my initial contact with you last year?
Yeah, well, just referring to actually our first email conversation where I kind of gave some quotes and laid out my thoughts is underneath the text for anyone who wants to look afterwards. But yeah, while after our first conversation, I definitely often projects like this give me an opportunity to look at something that a book that I've had for ages I'm interested in, but I'm like, wow, this makes me think of this book that I haven't read, even though I bought 2 years ago. So I read the book and I did, it really did make me think about our relationship with time, not just a symbolic relationship, for example, having monuments and statues and the like, but also our existential relationship to time.
That book, Vanessa, was there was Ilya.
Oh yeah.
Try to remember the name of the book because I read it too. So, it's amazing. I have it somewhere.
It's called Order Out of Chaos, and again, this is in the just beneath my text on the Archive of Destruction website. Order Out of Chaos, Man's New Dialogue with Nature. And it's, I think, a chemist and a philosopher got together to write it. I mean, it's a bit out of date now, but it's, and it was Ilya Perigoni, I'm butchering the name, and yeah. Isabel Stengers.
Perigoni, yeah.
Perigoni. And the book is like very scientific, but also there's obviously a philosophical bent to it, because like at a certain point, as like a lot of physicists have found that just the material kind of disappears, and what you're left with is the stuff of our own creation almost, that you're left with our experiences and the way we organize our experiences, and there's not really any getting away from that. So that I suppose any discussion around destruction is also a discussion around existence of objects, yes, but it's also how things exist to us in our experiences. So that this book, and then getting onto Simone Weil, who there was a passage that came to mind again after we spoke, which I'll read it here because I've just got it up. We possess nothing in the world. A mere chance can strip us of everything except the power to say I. That is what we have to give to God. In other words, to destroy. There is absolutely no other free act which it is given us to accomplish, only the destruction of the I. And elsewhere in the book, she calls it destruction here, but more commonly, she calls it decreation, which is slightly different, where basically, I suppose it's like, you could compare it to the Buddhist notion of letting go of attachments, like letting go of your attachments to things, which I suppose is like in reading Eloise's text, in a sense, the opposite sensibility to the idea of destroying things in order to destroy the thing within you, destroy your attachment to the past, which I suppose can happen when it happens against your will. But what she, Simone Weil, would have argued, or what I believe she was saying, was that you have to destroy that which is within you, or let go of that part of you that needs to be attached to things, like let go of idolatry, and which I guess a lot of statues are symbolic of that need within us, rather than being the thing themselves. So yeah, and it's still something I'm picking, but I think reading and writing about it definitely, and having great conversations about it, definitely is just a brilliant way to grapple with it. In a way, I feel like it's a bottomless kind of
certainly
thing.
There's no conclusion at all, especially where Simone Weil is concerned.
Yeah.
The weirdness, the trippiness, and there's a sort of connection between your interests, I think, and Eloise's, and this idea of the apparent kind of contradiction in the nature of destruction, and a reflection on, you know, the eternal present and our relationship to time, which I think is really interesting. And it sort of comes out in sort of multiple layers of, you know, many readings of your text. It's definitely something that requires, you know, a concentrated thought, but also multiple readings, and there's no conclusion. It's a sort of open-endedness that I think is really wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanessa. We've got
welcome.
just a few moments now just to either take any questions or have a discussion between us. And while you're thinking of questions, anyone in the audience, I thought I'd just ask any of the speakers, because this is something that came up in the last talk. It was really nice. Maya Becken said, oh, it'd be really nice just to sort of have a chat about other artworks in the archive that you know, I'm interested in, and we didn't get around to that. But I thought it might be an opportunity, because there are so many conversations that I've had with all three of you about, I sent you lots of my texts over the period of my writing, and you ended up having all these great sort of comments and thoughts. So Eloise, I just wondered if there's any projects or artwork that you wanted to mention, maybe Alison's, in fact, I don't know.
Oh, hang on. Oh, am I? I'm speaking. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, rich choice there. Yeah, I mean, Alison's ambit is that. I mean, I think I was really drawn to ambit because it's just such a fascinating idea that she sort of set this public sculpture in motion by having it floating on the river. And in a way, that kind of idea of an ambient public sculpture that's kind of has to have a lifespan and work with sort of the currents, the natural currents of the river. And it didn't work fully, excuse me, but I think there was some issues in its structure that meant that it kind of, but there's this really amazing article, it's actually in the newspaper, I think, about its demise, where Alison just says, yeah, and it's kind of been sent for scrap now or something in this very perfunctory way. And it was really powerfully captures the idea, I think, of something having these dual, these sort of, you know, well, having multiple registers or sort of symbols or values in it. And, you know,
and so much hope. There was so much absurd kind of, you know, pressure on that artwork to do something that it absolutely wasn't able to do. And its failure just became even more poignant through that. You know?
I think it's also such a beautiful idea, I must say, you know, because the idea of a moving kind of sculpture that looks rather at first sight sort of like, some kind of, you know, raw iron thing that you might find in a city somewhere, but it moves in this beautiful sort of quasi animal or sort of reptilian way.
Yeah,
Got all the animals wrong there, but yeah.
Vanessa, just really briefly, was there any artworks in the archive that you felt were sort of resonated with you in any way?
I think I mentioned in my text the Robert Smithson partially buried shed, which where the physical decomposition, which is the intention of letting a structure well, just be returned to nature through these processes, which, you know, was, let's say, maybe in the sort of conceptual art period, something that wasn't particularly politically charged, but it then coincides with the location, because it's on campus of Kent State University. And Kent State University is the place where students were shot by police and died in protest to Vietnam War. So this particular artwork, public artwork, became a symbol of something it was not really intended for. So I thought there were these, you know, unintended, well, consequences which art always brings with it.
And that's often the artwork that I draw on when I introduce the project, because it's such a great example of the sort of artist coming along with an original concept, you know, entropy, and then that being overlaid with another discussion that took it way beyond the original idea. Vanessa, can I ask you if you have a kind of...
Yeah, I would have. I was going to mention the same work actually, because I think that the entropy, like all of it, but also it being symbolic of entropy, was something that really sparked me off with looking into the book called Order Out of Chaos, because it's entropy kind of introduced the arrow of time into the world, I guess, the fact that things aren't reversible. So yeah, like that one really stayed with me. I think also it really kind of, it just links a lot of the concepts explored, at least by Eloise's text and all our texts together, I think, because of, it's kind of this kind of tension between man dominating nature and how that's like profoundly changed our relationship with it, with the world and with each other, and the other way around, like the kind of reabsorption of us and everything we do into nature potentially, and it's always a potential, and it could be seen as a threat or it could be seen as something else. That depends on us, I guess. But yeah, I think that's a really fascinating work.
That's such a lovely way of ending this talk, actually. I think you've done a brilliant job of sort of bringing it all together, the sort of human and nature angle. I just want to thank all of you so much, not just for joining us today, but also for your incredible conversations and belief and, you know, kind of understanding. It's just so lovely as a sort of freelancer sitting in my shed in Essex to get conversations like this going. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Gareth now.
Thanks, Jess. I've got so much I want to say. Because I think one of the amazing things is just how, by bringing these examples together, how you find these kind of tendencies in thinking about work. And so during the course of these three talks, I've just been like constantly thinking of different examples and relationships, and it's such a beautiful reading, Vanessa. Thank you so much. And your examples, Marysia and Eloise, it's just really wonderful to hear you speak about them. It just really brings to life like the pieces that you wrote. So I just want to thank you all so much. And of course, it's been like an incredible privilege to be working with Jes Fernie on this project. So yeah, just thank you so much, Jes. We're really delighted at Flat Time House to have the opportunity to work with you on this project. And then, I mean, there's a load I want to say, but I can't, I don't have time. So maybe at another opportunity in the future.
Yeah, we've got to all meet together in real life at Flat Time House, and everyone who's watching is invited. Please, please, please come. And maybe we can do some kind of online thing, because I now understand that it's incredibly, you know, kind of problematic to just hold events in London, but you know, without inviting, you know, many other people. But can I just give a huge note of thanks to Wayne Daly, who has designed the website. I mean, really, it's just incredible what he's done. And also Matt Luke, who's the brains behind the website build. Together, they've done the most incredible job of kind of bringing my sort of scattered, you know, kind of disordered thoughts together and make this into something really, really beautiful. I just wanted to make sure I thank them at the end.
Yes, and we should also thank David Bickle and Arts Council England as well. Otherwise, this project wouldn't have been able to come to fruition in the way it has done. Yeah. So thank you all for attending this event, and it's been a real, really wonderful. I've got so much I need to think about now, so I'm not going to be able to do my admin for a while. So, and hopefully see you all again soon at Flat Time House. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.